3 years, I would have one deal a year that just wouldn't close.
Yeah.
Now I think I've got 4 so far this year. We've gotten all the way to 3 days before closing after somebody telling us it was a cash deal, and I'm going, oh, I don't have that money. A tenant was kind of sitting in the middle of the living room in his underwear having a beer, and
remember we had
said, do you still want to buy it?
So what looks like a firm deal on paper can turn into a nightmare really fast. So we're talking about ambiguous clauses, conditions. There's a lot of things that could blow up a real estate deal every day. Isn't that the truth?
Yes, and I'm seeing it more and more lately.
Really?
Yeah, especially the last year, seeing a lot of firm deals fall apart, either because buyers weren't really committed or didn't understand what they were agreeing to, or we've got some bomb clauses in there that we can't reconcile.
So, okay. I remember you and I talking during COVID, and you had deals that were together, and then when you got the person in the office, or I think that's the story you told me, you're like, it's landlocked. How are you going to get in? Like, are you going to parachute in? But you remember that? And people were just buying. But now, like, people are more trepidatious. They're taking their time. But, so what's the issue?
I don't know what the issue is, but it's becoming a really serious problem. And I was actually in at your brokerage not that long ago talking about this, about how you're supposed to be coming and listening to these things, about how it's almost like buyers aren't taking the contract seriously the way that they used to. And part of what I was talking about was deposits. So we're still seeing these little tiny deposits. So people really don't feel like they have skin in the game, and they're not understanding that they can be sued for all these other things if they terminate. And then, of course, from a seller point of view, I say all the time, a judgment is great, but you have to enforce it against somebody. So if they're leaving town or leaving the country, or if they just don't have any money, does it really matter?
So, I mean, I'm always telling people to put down, 1%. I mean, how much should we be putting down?
Well, I guess it depends on who you're representing. If you're the listing agent or if you're the buyer agent, and as you know, as a listing agent, you want those nice big deposits. And builders don't seem to have a problem asking for a large deposit, but I'm still seeing these $1,000 deposits.
Oh, I mean, I'm in the middle of a deal now. It's a little over $1 million, and we have a $20,000 deposit.
And that's good, because you think from a seller's point of view, if that falls apart, worst case, there's $20,000 to kind of try to make them whole. If you've only got $1,000 or $5,000 as a worst case, you're going to be pretty upset. And then you're going to be, oh, well, you're going to have to go to court to collect all of this. Maybe we can enforce it, maybe we can't.
But if I'm a first-time home buyer, if I'm using one of those programs, it's very difficult for me to come up with the additional deposit, right?
Yeah.
So buyers aren't taking it seriously. Is that because they're not informed of the consequences, or they're not educated? Like, what is that, you think?
I don't know. And it's remarkable how many times people think that it's just their deposit that they're going to lose. And they'll call and say, oh, I can't close, I don't actually have financing. Or I think part of it is they're telling their realtor that they have financing, but they don't. Or they're not understanding that trying to get a line of credit on something that they already own is considered financing. And they need to get all those pieces together before they go ahead. And that seems to be the biggest thing that's happening. Although I did have somebody call me a few weeks ago and say they just didn't like that house anymore. And they didn't want to close on it. I'm like, well, you have a firm deal. Here's all the bad things that are going to happen to you. And again, they thought that it was just the deposit that they were on the hook for.
So, I mean, I see there's probably around 19% of the deals that are conditional fall apart.
Yeah.
And what would you say if you had 10 deals in front of you, how many of those would fall apart? Or 100 deals?
Depending on the time of year, it seems like it's more now. But if I saw 10, I'd probably lose 2. And I would say one would be on inspection and one would be on financing. Is what I would typically see.
Be during the conditional period?
Yeah, during the conditional period.
So I get that when that happens. But what are you seeing at closing, or from firm to closing? What's happening there?
Well, historically, for us anyway, in like 22, 23 years, I would have one deal a year that wouldn't close. maybe.
Yeah.
Now I think I've got 4 so far this year.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's kind of what flags it for our office. Is we go, okay, there's a really weird trend here, and it for whatever reason, and lenders are stickier, and I wonder if it's because people are not understanding that pre-approved doesn't mean approved. Because the lenders are getting a little bit funnier about stuff, and as you know, pre-approval is great, but until they actually look at the house and they go and they get an appraisal, and sometimes the lender wants to look at all kinds of other things, you're really not approved until you have that, and I suspect that's part of it.
Yep.
We've gotten all the way to 3 days before closing after somebody telling us it was a cash deal, and them going, oh, I don't have that money, it's actually going to be a mortgage. And you go, well, we have 3 days and we don't have instructions. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
So I try not to let my deals fall. And every time I'm getting an offer in, I upset a lot of agents because I have a lot of boundaries.
Yeah.
But one of those boundaries is that, I want a pre-approval. I need to see a mortgage broker's name on it.
Yeah.
Because at least, now, can a deal fall apart with that? Absolutely, 100%. But at least I know that they're in the process if I see a banker's name on it.
Yep. That's fair.
And is that not happening a lot, you think?
Well, and we don't see that piece, so
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I really think a lot of it is people are telling their realtors that it's a cash transaction and it's not, or they're telling them that they have access to the cash and they don't, or they can't get the cash from where they're trying to get it from. So maybe they're trying to pull it from another property, they're trying to get it from another country, and that's where things fall down to. They have funds, it's in another country, and trying to get that over to here within any kind of reasonable timeline is next to impossible.
But even like so I don't do a lot of buys, but I did one last month, and they were a cash deal. And I said, well, I need some type of proof that this is going to be a cash deal. And then their finance person sent me the information.
Yeah, and that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So talk to me about your clauses that are ambiguous.
So, I say all the time, if you're doing a complicated clause, just call the lawyer that you're working with and ask them to help you with it. Because what happens, in particular with amendments, is, as you know, amendments aren't subject to legal review. So we're going to get an amendment, buyer, seller, they're going to sign off, it comes to me, it's already a done deal. So I might look at that and go, oh, this is missing a whole bunch of things, or it's not doing what my buyer or my seller intended, but everybody's already agreed to it. So a lot of times we're just really vague. So what we like to see is, we're going to do this, and if you don't, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we end up on closing day and the buyer or the seller hasn't done what they needed to do, and then we're fighting over what happens next. So maybe it's we'll replace the hot water tank by this date, by closing. If we don't, there'll be a holdback for this amount, or there'll be a credit for this amount. And that way, on closing day, we're not in a big fight over the value, because I can guarantee you that the buyer thinks it's worth way more and the seller thinks it's worth way less.
Yeah. Oh.
And then you get into that absolute terrible day where I'm trying to find the other lawyer, they're trying to find their client, they got to come back, they got to find me, I have to find my client, and everything just falls apart.
That's why you never close on a Friday.
You're right, or a long weekend.
Yep.
And I do find realtors are more reluctant to do that. Like Thursday tends to be our busiest day now, and that's great because it gives you an extra day as long as Friday isn't the holiday. So the more detail you can put in, the better. And just you should have a lawyer that you're working with that you can reach out to and go, do you mind looking at this clause? It's a little bit weird.
There should always be a consequence to a clause.
There should always be a consequence. A what if. And and that's what you should be looking at when you're drafting this, or when you're looking at it, is going, okay, on closing day, how can this bite me in the butt? What can go wrong? And if you if you have everybody, when everybody's happy, and everybody's happy, I bought, I sold, everybody's super agreeable when you're doing these amendments. When you get to closing day, people are cranky and they just want it done. And you've always got one party that's in a stronger position. Either the seller needs the money because they're trying to do something else right away, or the buyer's got that moving truck there. So if you negotiate it ahead of time, everybody knows where they stand. Your client's going to be a heck of a lot happier because they're not in a fight and they knew what to expect if it wasn't done.
But sometimes at the end of the day, you can bring your seller to the well. Mm-hmm. And you and I have gotten caught in a couple, and the seller knew what they had to do.
Oh yeah.
And they were reminded of what they had to do. And that's why I always like to go personally the day before the property closes, because you just need to know what's going to happen if there's something potential could happen.
And the biggest thing that we fight over on closing day is cleaning. And, everybody has a different standard on cleaning.
Yeah.
So, you'll go in and your buyer will be like, this place is disgusting, and they'll send me pictures of dust bunnies. Or you'll get, a seller that's left, garbage and tires and, furniture and all this other stuff. I've gotten some pretty wild both ways. Like some days I'm like, this is terrible. And other times I'm like, my goodness, there's nothing. You're sending me a picture of animal hair on the outside step. I'll go sweep it off. Yeah. And we try to set that expectation with our clients when we meet with them. Like I say to my sellers, get it as clean as you possibly can. And I say to my buyers, unless it says professionally cleaned, I really want you to have a reasonable expectation, and you're going to be cleaning it after you move in anyway. Because you don't want to be fighting all day over closing day, and you're probably going to end up with like $200. And eventually you're going to end up paying a lawyer $400 to fight you for $200, if nobody's being reasonable. It's just not worth it. But again, with the wording of an agreement, and that's something else that a realtor can look at, because there's a big difference between broom clean, which is, I always say to people, it's not your mom's clean. Broom clean it should be in a reasonably clean state, but it's not going to be perfection. And professional cleaning, or a deep cleaning, which is a step above your like a professional deep clean, should be absolutely sparkling, because sometimes professional clean, we get a receipt, it says it's been professionally cleaned, but the buyer doesn't agree that it's clean enough. So, again, it's all about setting the expectations. And then the one that I hate is clean to a professional standard. Well, what does that mean? Whose professional standard? So that one is the one we fight over the most, because the buyer says, it's supposed to be professionally cleaned, and the seller says, no, it's clean to a professional standard. Any professional cleaner would agree. And you end up on the fight over, well, what does that mean?
Yeah. Just give up the couple $100, make it happen, and go away and get the headache gone.
Look,
because it can be a headache.
Great closing gift for your clients. Clean, if they're a seller or if they're a buyer. That's why I love the military ones. Well, I don't like the military ones because of the pricing, but I love that they're clean, because we know that they're going to have the cleaning included. I'm like, oh, it's not a problem to have the cleaning.
So. Tell me the most horrific deal that you went through, even if you went back a few years.
Oh man, we get a lot of. Every year we have quite a few bombs. So we've had a few where a seller was supposed to do something, and I can't really get into specifics, but they did something so outrageously offside, but technically agreed with the wording. Which is always an interesting closing day. And again, that goes back to not having the really vague clauses. We did have one this year that had an animal stuck in a ceiling for 3 weeks. So that was fun.
It was dead up in the...
No, it was alive.
Oh,
it was
raccoon
alive.
or something.
We were trying to get it out. So sometimes, that's not anybody's fault, those kinds of things. But we've had, occasions where people have refused to sign. So, parties that are splitting up and somebody disagrees or decides that they don't want to sell after all, or they make it as complicated as possible. I've had a few bad ones with tenants. So I say, hey, watch with that lining it up with the day that the tenant's leaving. So sometimes the tenant's just really unhappy that they have to leave, and they're going to make it as difficult as possible. So they're going to either make a mess, or they're just going to refuse to leave. We had one where the tenant was kind of sitting in the middle of the living room in his underwear having a beer, and
remember we had
said, do you still want to buy it?
Remember we had one, this was a military family, and I think you were involved in that deal, and they were supposed to take possession, so they came here from Ontario, wherever it was, and we show up on closing day, and the tenant is still there, and she had no intentions of leaving, and she goes, my lease is not up till October. We're like, but the seller said, and so we had to scramble And, they're in the whole, and I remember they had the new baby then, and a dog.
That was me. Yeah,
That
I remember that one.
And they
Yeah.
were in the hotel room. And I think we sued that seller.
Tenants are hard.
Yeah.
And you really need to be, if you're representing the buyer or the seller, like you really need to watch your step with that, unless they're in a fixed term lease and you know the fixed term lease is going to be up. But when you're dealing with serving notice on those periodic leases, you got to be really you got to be really particular about those clauses, because the legislation is really funny on what you can and you can't do. And you're assuming that people aren't going to dispute it. And we've had times, many times, where we've given the proper notice and the tenant has just refused to leave. They can get some free legal advice with Dial Legal Aid, which is a great service, unless you're a seller who's trying to actually give somebody proper notice, and they're just digging in their heels and they're filing appeals and they're trying not to leave because they have nothing to lose and they have nowhere to go. So, you really need to make sure when you're listing these with the tenant, if you have a problem tenant, that you give yourself some time from the date that you're closing and the date that you're serving those notices to make sure that they leave, and to make sure that they leave the house in a good state of repair. Like, we've had tenants go and take like switch plates and light bulbs and just, and the poor seller has no idea, and they're thinking everything is fine, and they go in, the buyer goes in for the walkthrough in the morning, and there's nothing left. Like, they're unbolting things from the wall, which, as you know, are supposed to be included.
Yeah.
So you really got to watch those tenant files. They can be some of our messiest deals.
So if I were a seller with a tenant, the tenant should be out maybe 2 or 3 days before the closing.
Ideally.
And then the seller should be walking through the property before the buyer.
To make sure. Absolutely.
Good advice.
To make sure, yeah.
And I don't think we were working together back then, but this is in 2012. I had a closing that didn't close. And the seller never came forward with that. He had liens against the property. And it was interesting because the lawyer who worked the deal was kind of involved giving the client money. They had done deals prior to, like, real estate on they were business partners somehow.
Right.
And the deal at closing got held up, I would say, for 2 weeks. These buyers couldn't move in because now they're trying to figure out how to pay off. And it was interesting, the lawyer got paid, and myself and the other agent, like, your SOL, there's no money there.
Really?
Yep.
So that's something else that we're seeing, not that scenario, but something else we're seeing more is we've got some people that kind of bought when COVID prices were really high, and now they're selling mostly because they have to. They're getting relocated or some divorces, that sort of thing. And we're looking, and we're not sure if there's going to be enough money there. Or you look and you see some judgments, and there's some fairly large judgments, and you're kind of loosely trying to run the math for people, but you want to be aware of that as a listing agent now, to make sure that when you're picking your purchase price, because sometimes the prices are kind of far off from what they were, and that's just the nature of what the market did there. But you've got somebody with a $600,000 mortgage and they're trying to sell for $600,000. Well, that's not going to work, because they got to pay you, they got to pay me, they got to adjust for property taxes, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Or worse, you look and they owe our friends at CRA, $200,000, and there's $100,000 in interest and penalties and all that on top of it. So when we see that, we'll look and we'll go, okay, we got to slow our roll here during the lawyer review period. We'll see those judgments and we'll kind of be like, okay, let's pull back and make sure that we're going to have enough money, and we don't need to negotiate something. Sometimes you can negotiate with a creditor to get a release of a property and give them a partial payment, and they'll still owe the rest of the debt afterward, but that can take time too.
So what do you think is one clause or habit in the real estate industry that needs to die immediately when it gets to you, that should never get to you?
A clause that I would like to never see.
Yeah. Or something else, anything.
It's the tenant clauses. So it's just the straight up tenant to be gone on closing day, period.
Yeah.
And that's the one that gets to me the most, because it's not that simple. So to give somebody notice you have to have both parties agree to do something. So the buyer has to swear a declaration and the seller has to serve it. And you've got to know the timelines. So that would be kind of my biggest one, would be just these vague vacant possession, and I get the listing cut and it says that there's a tenant. Or just straight up tenant to be gone and no details, at least to me. Maybe they're going to be gone because they have a fixed term lease, but when I get that without any details, I get my back up on it, because it makes me nervous that maybe there's going to be a bigger issue with either closing timelines or getting rid of those tenants.
Well, that makes sense. Well,
And that clean to a professional standard, I really
okay,
hate that
one. Yeah, no.
What do you mean? Whose standard?
I even, if I'm on the buy side, I'll ask that the driveway be shoveled. I'll ask that the garbage be removed.
Yeah.
I'll ask that the lawn be mowed.
Yeah.
Like when I'm on the buy side, because no one wants to go into that. And if the buying agent is not doing their due diligence, and okay, one more thing before I end this. But, again, I have all these boundaries as a listing agent. And when it comes to, let's say, home inspections, a seller has 10 days or a buyer has 10 days to meet their conditions. I want the buyer to come back 2 days before their conditions are due, because I believe that my seller has a right to do their own due diligence and not accept, oh, hey, I want $20,000 off because I found mold in the attic. You got to drop it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so I think you have, as a realtor professional, I think, one, you got to protect whoever you're serving, whether that be the buyer or the seller. And I feel that sometimes sellers are put in an unfair advantage, that they're just thrown like, here you go, you got to accept it. And sometimes they are at an unfair advantage because they've either purchased a house and they need the sale of the house, and they just got to, for argument's sake, I call it drop your drawers, and you got to accept it. So I feel that the industry should allow sellers to do their own homework.
Yeah, and that's fair, because you would see this more than me, but there's often conflicting inspection reports, or just a difference of opinion, or the inspection says this may be an issue, and then depending on the buyer, they panic and they go, it is an issue, and they want it addressed. And we'll see that a lot. Where they go, oh, this could be potentially this, and then you see the amendment saying that they'll remedy it. And sometimes the seller will come back and they'll go, I don't have a receipt for that because I paid Joe Smith to come in and they said that there's no issue. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Or the receipt will say something slightly different because when they came in, it really wasn't that big of an issue. It was partially that issue, and then everybody gets upset because they wanted this fixed, but really it wasn't broken. So I think that's a good strategy. That would make sense to me.
Yep. Maybe not to a buyer, but hey, here we are.
Well, it depends. It's like anything. Like who needs something more?
No, I'm with you. Well, thank you for coming out again today.
Yeah, you're most welcome.